Good afternoon, everybody. It's Richard Barnett here from Hayes Talent Solutions. Hopefully you can hear me clearly and our panelists can all hear me correctly. So welcome and thank you for joining us today. On behalf of CIPS and Hayes, I'm really pleased to be presenting and discussing the findings of our latest report, the DNA of a Chief Procurement Officer. This is part of a series of reports that Hayes has commissioned over the past few years, including on the CFO area, the HRD area, and DNA of the CPO is the latest in that sequence. In putting together the report, we went out to a significant number, almost 100 CPOs, carried out interviews and research to uncover what CPOs share in common. And the insights we're going to be presenting this afternoon cover the agenda items that hopefully you can see on the screen, which includes education qualifications, background and experience of people who've achieved the CPO role, skills, personal characteristics, the business challenges that cohort of respondees see in the marketplace, their advice for career development for people who are coming up through the procurement sector, and there'll be time at the end for some Q&A with the panel members. So a lot of ground to cover. Hopefully everybody's had a chance to receive a copy of the full DNA of a CPO report. If you haven't yet, we're pleased to supply one to you, so just let us know after this session or request via the website and you can get a full copy of the whole report. So that's what we're covering today. I would like to take the opportunity to introduce the three panelists that we have on the call. But before that, I'd invite Mark Lamb, who's the General Manager for CIPS Asia Pacific, to say a few words of introduction. So over to you, Mark.
Well, thanks very much, Richard. On behalf of CIPS, I'm delighted to partner with Hayes. It's a very important partnership, and for years we've been doing the salary survey. And not only does it come out with key highlights as to the key attributes of successful procurement professionals, but it also highlights the fact of what's really necessary as we move into the future of procurement. And I think it consistently highlights the fact that people with CIPS qualifications typically get about 25% more income than people without the MCIPS qualifications. So I'm really pleased to partner with Hayes on this. Also, I'd just like to mention to people that the Modern Slavery Act is one of the key drivers in change in procurement in this year, along with some changes going along with GDPR, which is all about data protection. But in terms of modern slavery, we will be surveying our members, so please watch out for that. But also watch out for the Hayes report, because I think there are some key insights in what you need to know about being the future professional in procurement. So back to you, Richard. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mark. And likewise, we really appreciate the support of CIPS through this process. We've conducted 3 face-to-face presentations so far, and a very successful one, for example, in conjunction with CIPS in Queensland. So the panel members who are kindly joining us today, Lynn Penny. Lynn is the Group General Manager Procurement for Mirvac. She's been there about 5 years, but prior to Mirvac, she held senior procurement roles with other leading property sector organisations, as well as with Microsoft. Interestingly, when we were talking with Lynn the other day, she mentioned that she'd started her career as an IT professional, took a career break to have a family, and then when she returned, she was offered the opportunity to move into procurement of IT-related services and products, and used her knowledge of the IT sector to move more broadly into procurement roles and go onward and upward ever since that. So welcome, Lynn. Matt Perfect. So, yes, Thanks, Lynn. Matt Perfect, we've invited to join for a very specific reason. We found one of the key results from the DNA of a CPO research was talk about the importance of corporate social responsibility considerations in procurement strategy, and that's really Matt's area of expertise. So he uses his procurement and supply chain expertise that he gained with organisations like NAB and Toll, and as an independent consultant to help organisations understand, measure and improve the economic, social and environmental impact of their spending. And he'll talk specifically when we get to the section of the report findings that talks about corporate social responsibility. And our final panellist is Chris Jacob. So Chris is currently the Acting General Manager Finance and Procurement for the Victorian Government's IT Services Division, Senitex. Chris has a particularly strong background in regional APAC procurement leadership roles in the IT sector, with some huge roles for some of the really large global IT services businesses, but interestingly as well in the financial services sector. So he's recently been in a senior role for Bupa and has also worked in CEO and MD roles during his career. So has a broad background in terms of skills as well as industry sectors across the region. So welcome Lynn, welcome Matt, welcome Chris. As we go through the presentation, we'll be asking each of the panellists to share their thoughts, and also we'll hopefully have time for some questions at the end of the presentation. So from a technical point of view, if you want any questions or want to submit any questions, please use the chat or question function you'll see on the right-hand side of your screen. So attendees are muted, but you have an opportunity to present questions in that forum. So without further ado, let's delve into the findings of the report in more detail and see where that leads us. So the first area of the report we wanted to talk through was about CPO's education and qualifications. And one of the key aims of this report and the seminars that we've been running is to share knowledge and observations from people at the CPO level on what they've seen, what they've learned in their career, and what they look for from people in their teams that they're looking to promote. So it's definitely in that spirit. So tertiary education is obviously important to people working their way through the procurement career. 89% of our respondees have a bachelor's degree of some sort. Highest breakdown of that were 47% of that 89, so about half the bachelor's degrees are in business, commerce or finance, but a range of other areas. And 11% obviously by definition don't have a bachelor's degree of any sort. There's a range of further education that people have gone through, and our friends at CIPS will be pleased to know that 21% of the CPOs have an MCIPS qualification, 16% have an MBA, 16% also have a postgraduate diploma of some sort. So I was going to throw this first question to the panel and maybe get Lynn to comment. She mentioned about her own experience of gaining an MBA. So Lynn, tell the attendees a little bit about your educational journey and the value you put on further education within the procurement sector.
Yeah, thanks Richard. Yes, so I did my initial degree in IT, as Richard was saying. And so after coming back to work and moving into the procurement function, I actually find that relationship management, influencing skills, and how do you create that bigger relationship with the business was something I wanted to explore a bit more. And so that's where I found that extra sort of post-grad study, and I did my degree in management. And so that gave me that broader view of the business, and to be able to have discussions that weren't just procurement focused. And certainly I've sort of popped in and out of the procurement function over the years. And again, that sort of broad qualification has put me in good step for those roles. Sorry, I just think that general qualification. And again, my other kind of piece, I suppose, was I found it very beneficial that doing that postgraduate study, sort of 7 or 8 years after I had joined the workforce, just helped me as well, because I had some management experience, and a lot of the work that you do at postgrad is about, what happened in the workplace, how are you managing people, how are you interacting with the business. So again, if you kind of do that study too close together, sometimes you don't have that business insight.
That's great. Thank you, Lynn. And Chris, in your varied career, where would you place the importance of going on to do further qualification and considering a master's?
Look, it's always, any form of education is good, and learning is a lifelong experience. So I would think that one should continuously look for courses to improve your capability, because your career changes. You have different needs at different times. As Mark Lamb would say, an MSIF's degree stands you in great stead, particularly at an interview level. After that, it comes down to performance. But I, for example, when I was at KPMG, I did a graduate diploma at that stage because I felt it helped me at that particular time. So strongly recommend continuous learning. Thanks, Mark.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris. Appreciate your thoughts. The next area we looked at when we were doing the research was the background of individuals who end up in these top-level procurement roles. And we found from that research about a quarter of people have spent their entire career working in the procurement sector from finishing their studies. About half have done something else at some stage in their career, and I think Lynn's a good example of that, somebody who's started in, for example, IT, or one of our previous panelists started off as a corporate lawyer and moved into procurement and then spent the bulk of their career from that start in the procurement area. And about 28% had more recently come into procurement and built up. So an interesting spread of what people have done in the earlier stages of their career. In terms of experience, as you can see, 53% are in the 16-year plus bracket. As you'd expect, long lengths of time in working experience to build up to that. One of the things we delved into a bit more deeply was the value of having gained some career experience working overseas, as we saw that 57% of our respondees had worked overseas at some point, and that led us to think that in order to reach that CPO level, you maybe would benefit from having gained some experience outside your home market. And what we thought would be interesting when we got to this stage was to do a quick poll of the attendees on the call to see whether those attendees had a similar level of experience of having worked overseas. So you'll get a question popped up in a moment which will ask, have you had experience during your career working overseas? It's a yes or no answer. And this might be people who've grown up, studied in Australia, had some time in an international company or in an overseas location and then returned to Australia. But it could also be people who started their career, like Chris has, I know, in an overseas country. So Chris grew up, studied in South Africa, gained some great experience, and then emigrated to Australia. So just a point of interest for you to click a yes or no whether part of your career has been spent working overseas, and we'll give you a comment back on that in a few minutes when we've got the results of the poll back. But I would be interested in hearing from the panel at this point about what their thoughts are on the value of gaining work experience overseas. So Matt, I believe when we were talking the other day, you obviously were brought up in the UK and then emigrated to Australia. What are your thoughts? What do you see the value of gaining experience overseas and the value of having people in the procurement team from a diverse cultural background?
Thanks, Richard. Well, I guess I should preface my comments by saying that you've sort of kindly given me permission to be a bit of an agitator and take the somewhat contrarian point of view on the panel. And I guess, so that would probably be, start with, my comments on this. I mean, I was raised in the UK and educated in the UK, but my whole career was here in Australia, so I can't necessarily tick the box to say that I've had work experience overseas. But having said that, I do think as a procurement professional, I've always been very much a global citizen working in global supply chains. It's very rare that any organisation I've worked with hasn't had some aspect of its supply chain overseas. And as a result, I guess I've always felt that I've had a fairly global career, based right here in Melbourne. So for me, I think you raised the point of diversity. I do think that's an increasing challenge for all organisations, is to bring more diversity into their organisations at every level, including through their supply chain and the people that work for them. And I think that's the real opportunity that we have, whether we've worked overseas or not, is to understand and get exposure to different cultures, both geographically and other sort of cultural boundaries, and bring that type of diversity into our work and recognise that. So I think that for me is probably more important than physically where we've worked, is just using social media and the global economy that we work in to bring a sort of global citizenship mindset to our supply chain.
Great, good answer, Matt. Thank you. And Chris, I mentioned earlier you'd spent a lot of time in regional APAC roles and heavy exposure to Southeast Asia in particular. How do you see the Asian experience being important for a CPO operating in Australia?
I see it as being very important, Richard. I think being comfortable with American culture and European culture and Chinese or Indian, Southeast Asian, even New Zealand, it really helps you influence decisions and helps you support your people in what you do. So we truly are global today. We truly are diversified in our workforce, and I think if you understand how it all works, it really helps facilitate the right outcomes for your organization and its people. So very, very, very important. Thanks, Richard.
So we've had the results of the poll back in, and interestingly, so when we went out originally in the DNA of the CPO research, 57% had worked overseas. The attendees on this call today, it's actually 71%. So a good 14% higher. And so 71 yes, 29 no. Just interesting from a demographic point of view. A lot of people have used that to perhaps have a working holiday at some point, but also as a key part to, as Chris alluded, broadening their understanding of different cultures that can be very useful to what they're doing back in the Australian environment. In terms of crucial skills for CPOs to possess, what did our research tell us? Probably no surprises here that the most valued skill for CPOs was regarded as having commercial acumen. So 2/3 of respondees rated that as the most important skill. Stakeholder engagement skills were a close number 2 though, so again, probably not anything that's a significant surprise, but good to have that reinforced. And people management skills rated third. And obviously, people in CPO roles are usually managing reasonable sized teams, and being able to manage those people effectively was clearly a key component to making a success of the problem of the role. So certainly every CPO we had a conversation was the commercial acumen issue was a recurring theme. So that's a central finding from the report. In terms of views on personal characteristics, so what personal characteristics do our respondees feel a successful CPO need to have? 71% proactive characteristics, 64% collaborative, and 60% hardworking. So I'll ask the panel for their thoughts on the skills and personal characteristics that they feel have been important to them, and that they would look for people that they were considering promoting up through their procurement teams into more senior roles. So, Lynn, what are your thoughts about the skills and characteristics that aspiring CPOs need to have?
Thanks, Richard. Certainly, about being I suppose one of the key pieces for me is really around relationship management and influencing skills, which I suppose comes under that collaboration banner. But it really is, more and more around how we partner with the business, how we not only look at internally what's happening within our organisation, but what's happening in the external marketplace. And for me, more and more we're looking at how can we, automate or outsource a lot of the transactional activities that we do in the procurement space. So continually it's about what's our value proposition to the organisation. So what is it that we need to be able to do? So I think not only being proactive and collaborative, but being able to clearly articulate what your strategy is and what your value add is into the organisation is imperative. And I find it hardworking interesting. I mean, I think a lot of the time it's not about your, perceived time at the workplace. It's about what's your impact and output. So I find it hardworking is an interesting kind of concept, I think, in terms of what does it really mean for you. So I think that's it, Richard, in a nutshell.
Good observations, Lynn. And Matt, when we were talking the other day, you mentioned about the skills of the CPO of tomorrow. What are your comments around the crucial skills and characteristics for the CPO of tomorrow?
Yeah, look, I think really building on Lynn's point around the collaboration, and I think what we typically would call soft skills. I used to work with the faculty roundtable with a lot of CPOs on that, and I think consistently a big challenge for all CPOs has been developing those soft skills and what I would now probably refer to more as human skills as we sort of get into the stage of looking at what automation is coming into the profession. And to your point of what's the CPO of the future going to look like, I think increasingly we need to be focusing on developing for ourselves and for our teams those uniquely human skills that will really never be replaced by artificial intelligence or robotic process automation or any of those aspects. And when I talk about human skills, I'm talking about things like creativity, certainly the relationship skills that are fundamental to working with suppliers and internal stakeholders, but probably more specifically the emotional intelligence and increasingly I'm seeing work through a lot of work that I do with a company called the Trusted Negotiator, bringing what we refer to as spiritual intelligence into our sort of psyche and our mindset, and that's very much not based on a sort of religious or faith-based spirituality, but much more an understanding of core values, purpose, which I think is something that's getting talked about a lot in corporations. I know SAP Ariba have talked a lot about the purpose of procurement, and I think that for me those are the skills of really understanding what is the uniquely human skills that we bring to procurement. and how can we use them to complement what increasingly the technology of artificial intelligence is going to be doing from a technical perspective.
Excellent. And a good... sorry, yeah, Chris, far away.
Richard, I just want to add ethics to that list. You know, what we see, for example, like with the Australian cricket team, what we see a lot in the newspapers is you have to stand in front of the bus sometimes. So I think a strong ethical base is essential for the head of a procurement function. Terribly important. Sorry, Rich.
Yeah. No, that's a really good observation, Chris. And I think the cricket example is an almost perfect example of what happens when that doesn't apply. So, good call out. And a good segue, going back to Matt's comments about the CPO of tomorrow. What do people see as the biggest business challenges over the next 12 months for the CPO cohort? And we asked for feedback across our respondees, and this is what they said. So 50%, 49% thought that the biggest challenge was aligning and educating on the value of the procurement function to the wider organisation. The second was aligning strategic requirements with operational budget in the workplace, 38% restructuring of procurement processes, and 37% was relating to the recruitment of new people to build and develop the procurement function. So they were the findings and the thoughts about business challenges coming up over the next 12 months. The importance of the triple bottom line was something that came up loud and clear, with 63% of CPOs saying that an increased focus on corporate social responsibility and sustainability is something that they're seeing and need to be very cognizant of in developing their procurement strategy. 52% talking about the need to harness new digital technologies, and 49% the focus on the coordination in procurement activities. But I wanted to particularly talk about the corporate social responsibility area, as we have a real expert in that area on the call today with Matt Perfect. So I might start with you on this one, Matt. How well prepared do you think the aspiring CPOs that you see are to address the growth of importance of CSR and sustainability considerations in procurement strategy?
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, look, I think increasingly well prepared, and I think this survey results is showing that. I mean, I think triple bottom line reporting is not something that's new for organisations, and it's not new for procurement. We've had this in our toolkit and in our requirements for a very long time. But I think what's really changing, and I think an increasing view of leadership, but probably even more specifically, the younger generation of leaders coming up through the profession are really seeing this as much more of a strategic priority. And I think that's really the game changer for the profession and ultimately for businesses, where this no longer becomes something that we do alongside everything else in procurement, but it actually becomes the reason that we do procurement, and it becomes the reason that, to go back to the previous slide, the reason that we are aligned and educating the organisation on the value of procurement and how we align, and our strategic requirements will all be increasingly around these aspects of risk and more specifically impact. So I often use the example of Unilever and their shift towards sort of getting rid of the corporate social responsibility department in the organisation in favour of saying this is actually a component of every aspect of the business, from sales, marketing, right through to supply chain and procurement. And I think we really, as a profession, the challenge is for us to really do the same and say, well, how do we move beyond just the compliance aspect of this and make this very much a core part of our strategy? And that's really why, how I define, I guess, impact spending as a strategy for 100% of our spend, not just something that we do at the margins with as Mark mentioned before, slavery at the worst end of the scale of negative impact, and say social procurement, Indigenous procurement engagement at the best end of positive impact. Everything in between, which is all of our suppliers, we really need to start forming a view of what the impact our relationships and our supply chain and our spending has on the environment, on the world and people and the social issues that we face. And I think the ISO 2400 standard that was released last year for sustainable procurement is a great example of, there was never any standard for procurement that was not a sustainable procurement guideline. They published, there is one guideline for doing procurement, and it's sustainable procurement. And I think that really is the way organisations need to look at this. You can't have a procurement policy and then a sustainable procurement policy. There has to be one and the same. And that, I think, is what the big shift is. And
it's great comment, and really good to have your expertise on a panel like this. Chris, you mentioned that you felt Bupa had done some really good work in this area when you were with them. Maybe briefly give the attendees a little idea of what you were alluding to with Bupa's approach to corporate social responsibility and sustainability in the procurement area.
Yeah, I think it's not only Bupa. I think having just worked in the public sector, you see the importance that is being placed on procurement across the board there, as Matt is pointing out. You know, I think globally, slavery is something certainly that was high on Bupa's list. Obviously, Indigenous procurement is a major thing. And I think there's some other interesting areas that major corporations also focus on, which is areas like regional procurement. Sometimes we've also got to think in terms of regional procurement. Many of the towns in Australia maybe are not as rich as we are here in the major cities, and we could also diversify by spreading our purchasing to those areas. So I fully endorse everything Mark is saying there. Thanks, Rich.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris. Career development steps that our respondees identified as important are up on the screen. I think are reasonably clear to understand, and 50% belong to SIPs is a good endorsement of the value of SIPs, although obviously by definition that means 50% don't belong to SIPs, so there's some growth opportunity within that CPO cohort for people to become even more involved with the SIPs organisation. I'm interested in perhaps Lynn making a comment on what she's seen has worked for her in terms of career development steps, whether any of these are things that she's personally utilised, and if any stand out as specific benefits that she would recommend to other people on the call.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, well, I'm a member of SIPs, so there you go. I'm one of the 50%. And I think the networking piece and, keeping up to date with what's happening. But I suppose one of the key pieces for me around that whole career development is the network that you have, but also a coach or a mentor. So I have a coach, and I've had different sort of mentors along the way. But I think it's good to have that person who you've got much more of a one-on-one relationship with, and helps you just to navigate your way through, whether it's in the procurement space or not. But I think for me, Richard, that's been one of the key pieces in terms of me navigating my way through career development.
And thank you, Lynn. And Chris, you mentioned you'd previously sat on a SIPS advisory board, and you mentioned value of having some experience in the sales area as a good thing for a CPO to have empathy with the people who are selling. Is there anything to add around those comments, Chris?
Yeah, quickly. I think sales is very close to procurement when you're negotiating. If you sat on the other side of the fence as a salesperson, it helps you enormously as a negotiator in the procurement end. I'm a big believer in belonging to organizations like like SIPS. As you say, I spent a lot of time with Mark over the years on I think we called it the Strategic Advisory Council. Is that right, Mark? And I think there are other organizations, for example, like PATA, because things are evolving the whole time, particularly technically, and you really want to understand from your peers what they're doing and what's working for them. So big on that. Thanks, Rich.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So what do the CPOs who responded to our research have in common? As we see, they were generally well-educated, highly experienced. They really valued the stakeholder engagement and commercial acumen skills. They were committed to ongoing qualifications, learning and development. As you'd expect, proactive, hardworking, got on well with colleagues. A challenge was the continual need to educate their colleagues in organisations about the value of procurement, and with a strong focus on sustainability, corporate social responsibility, and harnessing new technologies. So some interesting findings, some reinforcement of things that people were probably already aware of, but it's good to have it backed up by research-based data. Now, looking at the time, we do have time for some questions. So I might see if you have any questions that you would like to submit, please enter them in to the questions box that you should have on the right-hand side. And starting to see a couple of things pop up. What's this first one? And I'll pass this through to the panel. So it's referring to the CPOs you interviewed say their number one biggest business challenge is aligning and educating on the value of the procurement function. But how do you actually do this? How do you actually align and educate the rest of the business on the value of the procurement function? Matt, I might invite you to comment on that. How do you do that in practice?
Yeah, well, look, I think I think one of the challenges for procurement as a profession is we're not very good at marketing, and I think we've got to learn from our colleagues in that space around this sort of thing, and that's why I to refer back to my earlier point around impact spending as a strategy. I think it really helps to differentiate yourself in an organisation and have a strong point of view around something that people are engaged with, and I think that's where impact and a lot of the risks that we're seeing in the supply chain now and diversity, these issues that are big issues for our boards and for our executives and for the whole organisation, working out what procurement's point of view is on these and how we uniquely contribute to adding value within the context of those drivers that are important to the business. Because obviously, savings is always going to be a component of that, but I think less and less is that what the wider organisation is focused on. So really having a point of view that you can attach to what you're doing and differentiate yourself.
Great comment, Matt. Lynn, I'd be very interested in your perspective. Our research, if my memory serves me right, showed that about 80% of the CPOs that responded were male. And as obviously a successful female in this sector, have you seen any particular successful approaches in order to align the rest of the business with the value of the procurement function? I'm just interested in your observations as you've developed in your role as to how to achieve that successful outcome.
Thanks, Richard. I think I think we need to come from a sound base. So as much as Matt was just saying, and again for me, I very rarely talk about savings that we contribute to the organisation, because for me that's not our core purpose. But having said that, we still need to have the right processes in place, the right procurement framework and methodology. But yeah, more and more my discussions with our executive team are around how we interfacing with our supply chain, how we're working together, what's the innovation that we see with our suppliers, how can we partner with our suppliers so that, my key suppliers will bring innovation to Mirvac rather than go to Lendlease or Leighton's. How do we really make sure that, our sustainability strategy is embedded in everything that we do? One of our big themes this year is around our impact on the community and what's the legacy we're going to leave. So again, for me, it's really about, when I have conversations with the executive team, is how does the procurement team contribute to what the strategy is for the organisation? And so that's not just about savings, it's about, impact, and as well as internal, but more and more externally, and how can we use our supply chain to deliver what our strategy is as an organisation.
Great. I've had a supplementary question specifically for you, Lynn, come in, so I'll read this. Lynn, after attaining a bachelor's degree, do you feel that a diploma in leadership and management would suffice instead of a postgraduate degree in the future of procurement? That is, are businesses in the future seeing a higher qualification in procurement or management? So the question was the value of a postgraduate degree, a master's of some sort, as opposed to a diploma. Do you think there's much differentiation for people seeking to develop their career between those two options?
Yeah, well, maybe I'm not an expert in this field, but it was interesting because I think we were talking before about, maybe your first, sort of couple of roles when people are looking at your resume, be looking at what your qualifications are, but after that, it's really your track record. And so, we're not talking about theory anymore. We're talking about practically what have you delivered. Having said that, though, I suppose the piece for me around that, as I said, that postgraduate qualification, and I don't know if it really matters what it is, it's more around what is it you're trying to round out in terms of your capability. So again, for me, it was really about how do I get that more strategic view of the business? How can I make sure that I can have the right conversations, using the right language with the right people? So I think some of it's about what works for you. And again, I suppose that's where I sort of come back to that piece around, for me, the importance of having that coach, mentor person in your life, because again, they just help be that sounding board and navigate for you what works more for you than anybody else, is my kind of take on it.
Excellent. Thank you, Lynn. And just to finish up, I have another question, which I'll just ask perhaps Chris and Matt to add a couple of words to following Lynn's comments. Just your best advice, a couple of words around career development in this area. So, Chris, maybe first, a few words on what you think your best advice to anybody on this call to focus on for developing their career.
Well, it's as Lynn just said, it's about performance. Often we study straight after school and it helps us get jobs, but after that, a lot of it is around performance. And then in those continual discussions with people that you think are important in your life, to understand what you want to do and maybe what the organization sees as being important. But at the end of the day, it's about performance, understanding what your organization wants, and delivering value. So thanks, Rich.
Great. Thank you, Chris. And Matt, a few words just on any final advice, the most important thing people need to focus on for career development?
Sure. Well, probably no surprise that for me, it's about, as I said before, having a point of view, standing for something that people can get behind you on an emotional level, winning the hearts over the mind. So, for me, that's been impact and impact spending. I think that's an opportunity, and I'm more than happy for any procurement professional to sort of co-opt that as their role in the organisation. But I think that's really essential to differentiating yourself and being authentic in your leadership.
Excellent. Look, thank you. We're at time for the scheduled time, so I just wanted to take a moment to thank everybody for joining us this afternoon. I can see that most attendees are still on the call, so hopefully that's an indication that people have found the content interesting and relevant. The more detailed DNA of a CPO report is available at the website in the bottom left-hand corner, hayes.com.au/CPO. As it says, Hayes has a very large following on LinkedIn, so please follow Hayes worldwide and be kept up to date with these sorts of reports in the future. I would also particularly like to thank Mark and SIPS for their support in this and many other projects in the past, to our panelists, Lynn, Matt and Chris, and obviously to everybody who dialed in as an attendee on the webinar. And as a final comment from Hayes, we place significant numbers of people in the CPO area and in the procurement area generally. So if you are at some stage in the future looking for a new position or looking to hire staff, please contact us and we will be delighted to help. And the area that I look after runs large-scale recruitment outsourcing contracts for significant number of organisations. So if part of your remit is looking at procurement of temporary or permanent recruitment services, I'd be delighted to have a chat at any point about alternative ways to manage that area of spend better. So without any further ado, thank you once more for your time. Hope it was of value. We will have a look through the other questions that we didn't get to, and if there's anything we feel we're able to respond to, we'll go back directly if we're able to identify the attendees who ask the question and supply answers. So thank you once more. Appreciate your interest and particularly the contribution of the three panelists and Mark. So we'll sign off now. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Rick.